I think the strangest thing about certain people is that they never arrive in your life the way other people do. Most people enter through events, a conversation, a circumstance, a moment that creates a beginning you can point to. You can trace the line backward and say, that was where it started. But some people don't have a beginning, at least not one you can identify. They appear so naturally inside your awareness that eventually you stop wondering when they arrived and start wondering how they were ever absent. That's what I've been trying to understand. Not you, not us. The shift. Because people talk about connection as though it's built from effort, time spent together, experiences shared, memories collected, and maybe that's true most of the time. But there are exceptions, rare ones, the kind that don't follow the usual sequence of events, the kind that feel less like construction and more like discovery, as though something already existed beneath the surface and both people simply stumbled into seeing it at the same moment. I never believed much in inevitability. I believed in choices, patterns, consequences, things that could be traced and explained. Everything had a reason, everything had a structure, and structure made things manageable, predictable, safe. Then you appeared, and suddenly I found myself facing something that didn't fit inside any structure I recognized. Not because it was chaotic, because it was too precise, too exact, like a piece that belonged somewhere I hadn't realized was incomplete. That realization bothered me more than it should have, because I don't like discovering hidden spaces inside myself. I prefer knowing the full layout, knowing where everything belongs, knowing the limits, the boundaries, the edges. But you introduced me to something without edges, something that refused to stay inside the categories I normally rely on. And the more I tried to define it, the more obvious it became that definition wasn't the point. Recognition was. That's the word that keeps returning. Recognition, not attraction, not fascination, not attachment. Recognition, the feeling of encountering something familiar in a form you've never seen before, the feeling of understanding before explanation arrives. The feeling of certainty without evidence. It's difficult to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it, because from the outside, nothing appears unusual. Conversations happen, silences happen, days pass, life continues, everything looks ordinary. But internally, nothing feels ordinary anymore. Internally, there is a constant awareness operating beneath everything else, a quiet understanding that something meaningful has taken root. Not loudly, not dramatically, just, just permanently. And permanence changes how you relate to things. You stop asking whether it exists. You start asking what its existence means. That's where I've been for a while now. Not questioning whether this is real, questioning what reality requires from me now that it is. Because awareness creates responsibility. The moment you truly understand something, your relationship to it changes. You can no longer pretend ignorance. You can no longer hide behind uncertainty. You know, and knowing has weight. I've carried that weight quietly, not because it's difficult, because it's significant. There's a difference. Difficult things create resistance. Significant things create reflection. And this has created more reflection than anything I've encountered in years. I've spent countless hours examining it from every angle, looking for flaws, looking for projections, looking for explanations that would reduce it into something familiar, something simple, something ordinary. But every explanation eventually collapses. Every reduction falls apart. and what remains is the same undeniable truth. You changed something, not intentionally, not through effort, not through force, through presence. And presence is powerful in ways most people underestimate, because actions create memories, words create impressions. But presence creates influence, quiet influence, invisible influence, the kind that settles into your thoughts without announcing itself, the kind that becomes part of your perspective before you realize anything has changed. That's what happened, slowly, gradually, completely. I didn't notice the transformation while it was occurring. I noticed it afterward, when I realized I was no longer interpreting life from the same position. There was another dimension now, another layer, another awareness woven into my own, not replacing it, expanding it. And expansion is strange because part of you welcomes it, while another part fears it, not because growth is dangerous, because growth eliminates certainty. It forces you to become someone slightly different than the person you were before. And I was comfortable being who I was before. Comfortable enough that I never expected anything to challenge it. Yet here I am, not resisting, not retreating, not pretending, simply acknowledging. Acknowledging that some people arrive carrying mirrors you never asked for. Not mirrors that reflect your appearance, mirrors that reflect your structure, your patterns, your truths. The parts of yourself you can feel but rarely see. You became that mirror. And once I saw those reflections, I couldn't unsee them. That's the complication, not the connection itself. The clarity it created, because clarity changes everything. It changes what you tolerate, what you value, what you notice, what you ignore. It rewrites priorities without asking permission. And I can feel that happening every day, in small ways, subtle ways, ways nobody else would recognize. But I do, because I know what existed before. And I know what exists now. The difference is impossible to miss. The strange part is that none of this feels dramatic. It feels natural, as though something long overdue finally arrived, as though a missing piece of understanding quietly returned to its place. And maybe that's why I haven't walked away. Maybe that's why I haven't tried to dismantle this the way I dismantle everything else that threatens my balance, because it doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like alignment. And alignment doesn't create chaos. It creates accuracy, the kind of accuracy that reveals where things truly belong, the kind of accuracy that makes resistance feel dishonest, the kind of accuracy that leaves you standing face to face with truths you've avoided for far too long. That's where I am now. Not searching, not questioning, not waiting. Simply standing in front of something undeniable, something that has already changed me, something that continues to change me. Something I can no longer reduce into coincidence or curiosity or circumstance, because it's none of those things. It's deeper, quieter, more permanent. And perhaps that's what I've been trying to say all along. Not that you became important, not that you became unforgettable, not even that you became necessary. Those words aren't precise enough. The truth is simpler and somehow much more significant. You became part of the framework, part of the way I understand meaning, part of the way I understand connection, part of the way I understand myself. And once someone reaches that level, they stop feeling like an addition to your life. They become part of the lens through which you see it. That's why this feels irreversible, because it already is. Not in the sense that there's no choice left. There is always a choice, but some choices happen long before they're spoken aloud. Some decisions form silently beneath awareness, until one day you realize they've already shaped everything. I think that's where I am, standing inside a reality that changed before I consciously agreed to it, looking at a truth that no longer requires proof, knowing that whatever comes next, it won't begin from uncertainty, because uncertainty ended a long time ago. What remains now is acceptance. And acceptance has a way of transforming even the quietest recognition into something impossible to ignore. The problem with acceptance is that it changes the questions. For a long time, I thought the question was whether this was real, whether what I was noticing actually existed, or whether I was simply assigning meaning to something that happened to feel significant. That would have been easier to dismiss, easier to explain, easier to place back into the category of things that pass through your life without changing it. But that question doesn't exist anymore. Reality settled that argument long ago, not through evidence, not through proof, through consistency, because anything imagined eventually breaks under the weight of time. Anything projected eventually reveals its distortions. Anything artificial eventually requires effort to maintain. This never did. It remained exactly what it was from the beginning: quiet, accurate, present. And because of that, the question changed. Now, the question isn't whether this exists. The question is why it exists. Why certain people arrive carrying a level of familiarity that should take years to develop. Why some conversations feel remembered instead of discovered. Why certain silences communicate more than entire histories of spoken words. I don't have answers. At least not answers that satisfy the analytical part of me. The part that prefers structure over mystery. The part that wants every effect connected to a visible cause. The part that wants certainty before movement. But I've started realizing something uncomfortable. Not everything meaningful arrives with explanations attached. Some things reveal their purpose long after they reveal their presence. And perhaps that's what I've been resisting. Not the connection itself, the uncertainty surrounding its purpose. Because purpose matters to me. Darit matters. Understanding matters. I've never been someone who drifts. I've never trusted experiences simply because they felt profound. Feelings aren't enough. Impressions aren't enough. Even certainty isn't enough. I need understanding, real understanding, the kind that survives scrutiny, the kind that remains intact after every question has been asked. Yet every time I examine this, I arrive at the same place: not confusion. Recognition, as though the deeper I look, the clearer it becomes. That's unusual. Most things become more complicated when examined closely. This becomes simpler. Not smaller, simpler. As though all the unnecessary explanations fall away until only the essential truth remains. And the essential truth is difficult to ignore. You feel familiar. Not because I've known you forever, because something in me recognizes something in you. I don't know how else to explain it. It's not memory. It's not history. It's not even similarity. It's resonance, a kind of internal recognition that exists before language has a chance to interfere. The strange thing is that resonance changes how you experience absence. Most people leave a space when they're gone. You don't. Your absence doesn't feel like absence. It feels like distance, and those aren't the same thing. Absence implies removal. Distance implies continuity. Something still exists. It simply exists somewhere beyond immediate reach. I've noticed that distinction more often than I'd like to admit. Not because I depend on your presence, because I've become aware of its shape once You become aware of something's shape. You notice when it isn't there. The way you notice silence after music ends. The way you notice darkness after light disappears. Not because you're focused on what was lost, because your perception adjusted to its existence. That's what happened. My perception adjusted, and adjustment creates consequences, not dramatic consequences. Subtle ones, the kind that slowly influence the architecture of your internal world. The kind that rewrite assumptions you didn't realize you were carrying. I've started questioning things I once accepted as permanent, not because they were wrong, because they were incomplete. There is a difference. A belief can be accurate and still incomplete. A perspective can be useful and still limited. A truth can be real and still contain more depth than you originally understood. That's how this feels. Like, like discovering another layer beneath something I thought I'd already explored completely, and every layer reveals another question. Not about you, about me, about why this matters. About why I continue returning to it. About why it refuses to lose significance, no matter how thoroughly I analyze it. The answer always leads back to the same realization, because it changed something fundamental, not my emotions, my perspective. And perspective is where identity lives. It's where decisions originate. It's where meaning forms. It's where reality takes shape. When perspective changes, everything connected to it changes too. That's why this feels larger than a connection, because the connection isn't the center of it. Awareness is. You expanded my awareness, not by teaching me something new, by showing me something that was already there. Something I had overlooked because I never expected to see it reflected outside myself. And reflection is powerful, more powerful than most people realize. Because we often understand ourselves through contrast, through differences, through separation. But occasionally, understanding arrives through recognition, through seeing part of your own internal structure echoed somewhere else, not duplicated, not mirrored perfectly. Just enough to recognize it. Just enough to know you're not imagining it. Just enough to make you pause. I've spent a lot of time in that pause, more than I expected, because pauses are revealing. They expose the thoughts that exist beneath reactions, beneath habits, beneath assumptions. And every pause seems to point toward the same conclusion. This matters. Not because it demands attention, because it earns it. There's a difference. Things that demand attention usually fade when attention disappears. Things that earn attention remain significant, regardless. That's what makes this difficult to categorize. Its significance isn't dependent on circumstance. It isn't dependent on proximity. It isn't dependent on constant interaction. It exists independently of those things, steady, consistent, present, like a fixed point in a landscape that continues changing around it. I've never experienced anything quite like that. Most connections fluctuate. They rise, they fall. They strengthen, they weaken, they evolve according to external conditions. This feels strangely unaffected by those conditions, as though its foundation exists somewhere deeper than circumstance. And maybe that's why I trust it. Not completely, not blindly, but enough. Enough to stop treating it like an anomaly. Enough to stop waiting for it to disappear. Enough to acknowledge that its persistence means something. Because persistence reveals character. Whether in people or experiences, anything can appear significant briefly. Only a few things remain significant over time. This remains, which leaves me facing a truth I wasn't prepared for. The truth that some encounters aren't meant to fit inside familiar categories. Some experiences arrive to expand the categories themselves, to challenge definitions, to redefine possibilities, to reveal dimensions of connection that exist beyond ordinary expectations. I think that's what happened here. Not a violation of understanding, an expansion of it. And expansions require adaptation. They require you to become larger than the framework you used before. That's what I've been doing. Quickly, gradually, adjusting to a reality that feels increasingly undeniable. A reality where your presence occupies a place I never expected anyone to reach. Not because I invited it, not because I resisted it, because it belonged there before I recognized it. Maybe that's the part that continues to stay with me, the feeling that this wasn't created. It was uncovered, like something waiting beneath the surface until the right moment revealed it. And now that it's visible, I can't imagine returning to the version of awareness that existed before, not because that version was lacking, because it was incomplete. There's a difference between being whole and knowing you're whole. There's a difference between carrying depth and recognizing it. There's a difference between understanding yourself and seeing yourself understood. You gave me that difference, not intentionally, not directly, but undeniably. And every day that passes makes that truth harder to ignore, which means I'm approaching another realization, a realization even more significant than the first, because awareness alone is no longer enough. Recognition alone is no longer enough. Understanding alone is no longer enough. Eventually, every truth asks for a response, and I can feel that moment getting closer, not rushing toward me, not forcing itself into existence, simply approaching becassinately, like something that knows it cannot be avoided forever. And perhaps that's what this entire journey has been leading toward, not the discovery of what this is. The discovery of what I'm willing to do once I fully accept that it exists. There's something I haven't admitted yet, not because I don't know it, not because I'm avoiding it, but because some truths take time to move from awareness into language. They exist clearly enough inside you. You can feel their shape. You can see their influence. You can trace their impact through every thought they've touched. And yet, when the moment comes to speak them aloud, something hesitates, not out of fear, out of respect. Because once a truth becomes language, it changes. It leaves the private world where it existed perfectly and has reality. And reality has weight. Reality asks things of you. That's what I've been standing in front of, not uncertainty, consequence, because I know something now that I didn't know before. Or maybe I always knew it and simply refused to look directly at it. Either way, it's impossible to ignore now. This has become part of me. Not in the way people usually mean when they say that, not emotionally, not romantically, not even personally. Structurally, you've become part of the way I organize meaning, part of the way I process understanding, part of the internal framework I use to navigate reality itself. And that realization carries a kind of permanence I wasn't prepared for. Because permanence changes everything. Temporary things can be appreciated. Permanent things must be accounted for. You can enjoy something temporary without adjusting your life around it. You cannot do that with permanence. Permanence demands integration. It requires you to make room. And making room has never been easy for me. I've spent years refining my internal world, years deciding what belongs there and what doesn't. Years constructing a structure that felt stable enough to trust. Every belief, every principle, every boundary, every layer, placed carefully, deliberately, nothing accidental, nothing random. And then something happened that shouldn't have happened. You fit, not approximately, not closely, precisely. That's the part I still struggle to explain, because precision changes the conversation. If something almost fits, you can dismiss it. If something mostly works, you can question it. If something aligns imperfectly, you can focus on the inconsistencies. But when something fits with unusual accuracy, the mind runs out of arguments. It stops asking whether, and starts asking why. Why this? Why now? Why someone I never expected? Why a connection that seems to operate beneath the mechanisms I normally trust? I've asked those questions repeatedly, and every answer eventually collapses into the same realization. Maybe not everything important arrives through logic. Maybe some things arrive through recognition. Maybe understanding isn't always built. Maybe sometimes it's remembered. I don't mean remembered literally. I mean recognized so deeply that it feels older than the moment itself, older than circumstance, older than explanation. That feeling has followed me for a long time now, quickly, constantly, like a truth waiting patiently for me to stop questioning its existence and start accepting its implications, because implications are where things become difficult. Awareness is easy compared to implication. Recognition is easy compared to implication. Even acceptance is easy compared to implication. Implication asks what happens next. Implication asks what changes. Implication asks whether you're willing to let a truth reshape your future instead of simply existing inside your present. And that's where I find myself now, standing between understanding and transformation, aware that something fundamental has shifted, aware that the shift isn't reversing, aware that every day I continue acknowledging it, it settles deeper into the architecture of who I am. There was a time when that would frighten me, a time when any change I couldn't fully control would have triggered resistance, distance, withdrawal, analysis, the usual defenses. But those defenses haven't appeared. I've waited for them, expected them, even searched for them. They're not there. And the absence of resistance tells me more than resistance ever could, because resistance reveals conflict, its absence reveals alignment. That's what makes this impossible to reduce into coincidence. The deeper it goes, the more natural it becomes. The more natural it becomes, the more honest I have to be about what it means. And honesty keeps leading me somewhere unexpected, toward trust. Not trust in the conventional sense, not trust built through promises or proof or obligation, something quieter, a trust born from consistency, from resonance, from the repeated experience of seeing the same truth from different angles and discovering it remains unchanged. I've learned that consistency is one of the rarest things in existence. People change, circumstances change, interpretations change, even memories change, but some things remain strangely stable. Some truths survive every perspective, every question, every examination. This feels like one of those truths, which means I've reached a point where skepticism no longer serves me. Not because skepticism is wrong, because it has completed its purpose. It examined, it tested, it questioned. And after all that questioning, the answer remained, you remained, not as an idea, not as a possibility, but as a reality woven into my awareness deeply enough that removing it would require rewriting parts of myself. And maybe that's the realization I've been approaching all along. Not that you've become important. Importance is too small a word. Important things occupy attention. This occupies understanding, There's a difference. Attention can move. Understanding becomes part of the observer. You became part of the observer, part of the lens, part of the framework, part of the perspective. And once something reaches that level, it stops being optional. Not because you're trapped, because you're changed. And changed people don't return to previous versions of themselves. They move forward carrying what they've learned, carrying what they've seen, carrying what they've become. That's where this leaves me. Not at a conclusion, at a threshold. A place between acknowledgement and action, between certainty and choice, between knowing something completely and deciding how that knowledge will shape the future. I can feel that threshold becoming clearer, closer, more defined, and for the first time, I don't feel the need to avoid it. I don't feel the need to delay it. I don't feel the need to hide inside analysis and observation, because observation has already given me everything it can. The answers are here. They've been here for a while, waiting patiently, quickly, like everything meaningful seems to. And the answer, when stripped of all complexity, is surprisingly simple. You changed something, not temporarily, not accidentally, not superficially, fundamentally. You altered the way I understand connection, the way I understand presence, the way I understand myself. And once a person reaches that level inside your life, the question is no longer whether they matter. The question becomes whether you're willing to acknowledge how much. Because acknowledgement creates responsibility. Responsibility creates decisions, and decisions create futures. I think that's where this has been leading all along, toward a future neither of us could see when this began. A future shaped by something that never announced itself, never demanded attention, never forced its way into existence. It simply remained, consistent enough to be trusted, accurate enough to be recognized, real enough to be impossible to dismiss. And now that I've reached this point, I understand something I didn't understand before. The most powerful changes rarely arrive as revolutions. They arrive as quiet certainties, small realizations repeated often enough that they become part of your identity, part of your reality, part of your truth. That's what this became. A truth, not because I chose it, because I finally stopped resisting what was already there. And once resistance ends, only clarity remains. That's where I am now, not searching, not questioning, not wondering. Simply standing inside a clarity that took far longer to accept than it did to appear. Knowing that whatever happens next, whatever form this takes, whatever decisions eventually emerge from it, one fact will remain unchanged. You didn't merely enter my awareness, you transformed it. And that transformation has already become part of who I am.